Good evening and welcome to yet another episode of Before It Was Headlines, It Was Prophecy. I'm your host, Katie Elizabeth. I'd like to talk today about how, as these four horsemen are coming across the earth, if we stop and realize just how many things have become not personal, have become impersonal. It's almost as if we just have this attitude that really nothing's personal. You know, we've become very casual about what at one time was very private situations. We've become very used to just not having personal interaction in transactions. And so as we talk about these four horsemen tonight, that's what we're going to be addressing. Nothing personal. For years now, religion has become almost synonymous with politics and political views. And each believe, of course, that we're right. And we have no idea what we're truly inflicting on another person. But it's nothing personal. You know, except they need to realize they're wrong. That's pretty much the attitude that we're dealing with. When we look in the mirror, when we look at other people. That's pretty much our attitude. And we do have this concept that it's nothing personal. And this whole conquering and religion and politics together is gaining momentum. And we have, you know, on one side we know. What's really interesting is no matter how the blame gets cast, we all still live with the results. But we have, you know, on one side we have the people who feel that our society should be run much more conservatively, especially fiscally. And yet, what do we do to help the people that are already here? And then we have the other side who says, you know, we need to be helping everyone and level the playing field. But by that same token, how is that really done when people do have different motivation, different interests, different priorities? So as we continue to just try to mesh a society into what one group wants or what another group wants, we're taking on that same conquering attitude. You know, I mean, here's the bottom line, and this is a big one right now. And I'll say this, I'm not for abortion. I don't believe in doctors. And I believe that people are given choice long before another human being or another life is involved. I believe we're to choose life. But I'm going to use this because it is such a huge hot button topic. And I'm thinking, okay, so if we do, what do we do with all these babies after they get here? I'm not for abortion. But by the same token, the people who are not for abortion are also not for a lot of social programs. And on the flip side to that, the people that are for all the social programs and want everybody to have a chance, well, what about this little person who doesn't have a say yet? I don't hear either side really choosing life. I don't. And so with that being said, here we are, you know, we end up with just the politicians and the powers dividing the people while we try to conquer each other in our plans. And although many choose to believe that this nation was founded on some sort of quest for religious freedom, it was actually the quest for aristocracy and wealth. And, you know, not so much in taxes, in their own land. And it was established at the genocide of the original inhabitants. So we can say that, you know, we can tell the story now how we like, but history is written by the victor. And let's face it, the conquering victor is always mounted on the white steed. He's always the victor is always the good guy, as the history tells it. So we need to hang on to the facts in all of these things and really weigh them out rather than just choosing a side and saying everyone else is wrong. We need to see what our God says about this. And the fact that the rider on the white horse has been released tells me he already knows. He already knows. We're going to stand and give an account for what we say and what we do, not anybody else. And as our division on the conquering continues, then we move on to, no peace. The rider on the red horse. Wars are seldom fought by the actual aggressive or offended entity. We've talked for a long time about wars. Wars are now national, and the young men fight the old men's wars. That's really what it is. And, some Middle Eastern cultures, we've talked about, their leaders hiding through wars. Well, ours do too. It's the young men who really have no axe to grind at all that are on the front line. And that's literally one of the factors that the peace is removed, is that nobody pays their own price in these wars. Neither resolution nor conflict are personal. So there's really no reason to seek them because it's not, back in the days when the kings went to war, they really did. Alexander the Great fought his own battles. King David was supposed to be at war. He was a warrior king. We need to realize when people fight their own battles, there is something personal at stake. And that no longer exists. There'll be no peace. There's no reason for a resolution if you're not personally involved. And that's a frightening statement, but it's a true one. And another way that we've taken the personal out, which really frightens me on the rider of the black horse, is we've taken the personal factor out of the begging. And, although people remain dependent and not able to help themselves, it's become more of a, what's my word I used for this? It's almost an entitlement and a dependence. And the reality is, at some point, there'll be no buying and selling without this, without a mark. And as people become more dependent and lose sight of the personal factor of that, because now it just arrives in the mail or it's just put on a card, or do you know how many transactions we actually already participate in which there really is no physical human interaction? You can stop and get gasoline and either use a credit card or a debit card, ATM cards. We've taken a lot of personal out of our transactions already, which is kind of just putting us to a point of we're becoming numb and immune to the fact that this is going to continue until there really is just a mark that says you can have it or you can't. So it's the subtle changing it down, taking the personal out of it, that at some point a mark to buy and sell is going to be a very, very personal matter and a very personal decision of eternal consequences. Now, health is another thing that's simply, nothing personal anymore. People talk about everything with their health issues. It's like, oh my land, I TMI, too much information. And as we talk about this, you can already tell people do not feel responsible for their own health issues. We haven't for a long time. We have insurance, we have copay, we have Medicare, we have Medicaid. People, and I personally believe my health is a result of my spiritual state. May not be right now, but we make bad decisions, we cause poor health. We learn, some families are more prone to problems, but we could also do something differently. In the Old Testament, everyone went to the high priest, whatever your problem was. In the New Testament, we found out Yeshua is willing to be our high priest. That's really good news. But we have to own and take ownership and take responsibility for what we're doing in our own health. And we've taken the personal out of that as well. And as we continue to remove the personal factor in all of our interactions and in all of our responsibility, we're putting ourselves, as we back away personally, we're putting ourselves closer. We're allowing ourselves to become closer to accepting something and just mentally saying, well, it's not what I really believe. It's not what I really think. Depersonalize, saying nothing personal is, just because we remove ourselves from the responsibility doesn't mean we're truly removed from it. Scripture says it's all very personal, and we have the promise and the assurance from our Creator that He will personally take care of us through this time if we trust Him. And that requires personal. It has to be everything personal. The problem is our society has made our beliefs to be nothing personal. People can say they believe one thing, and as long as they're not doing what they're against, then everything else they're doing is justifiable. And, there are a lot of examples of that. We already know that. People can say they trust God as they place their trust in religion, politics, military, social services, medicine. They just kind of sprinkle God on top of that and say, see, He's provided it all. Well, that may not be the case. That may just be your opinion. And it is time we have to get down to the truth. We have to take the truth in personally and realize everybody's just got an opinion. But there is a truth. And we have access to it. Someday, and it may be very soon, that these entities will require more than just proof of lack. They may actually they're working towards requiring some sort of permanent, what they call real ID. We don't know where all this is going. We don't know how many steps are involved. We do know where it's ultimately going. But none of us know how many steps are involved. The good news is, we're promised our Creator, Yud-Heh-Vah-Heh, will order our steps if we seek Him. This has been another episode of Before It Was Headlines, It Was Prophecy, with your host, Katie Elizabeth. Good night.